Let's talk about what's going on with the Supreme Court.
Oh, this is fun.
Yeah, so the Supreme Court has agreed to hear a case on carrying guns in public. I mean, that's the breaking news, right? Ooh. So it's they say the justices who have not issued a major Second Amendment ruling since 2010 will hear a challenge to a New York gun control law. It's they've granted, what is it, a writ of
don't say cert. Don't say the long word. I don't know how to say it.
Certiorari or
certiorari, something
like
Latin.
that.
It's a Latin word.
Studio.
So the Supreme Court said on Monday that it would review a New York law that imposes strict limits on carrying guns outside the home, setting the stage for its first major Second Amendment case in more than a decade. The move came in the wake of a recent spate of mass shootings, which were followed by calls from Biden and other Democrats for stricter restrictions on firearms. It kind of sounds like they're going in the other direction, though.
Well, we
don't know for sure.
There's that dusty old parchment that nobody wants to read anymore, that every once in a while these guys pull out, and they take a look at, and it's actually got some words in it. And keep and bear are co-equal. All right? So we've pretty much established you can keep arms. They like to argue about which ones, but that's kind of DC versus Heller, but it's a pretty broad interpretation on that. In common use and useful in the militia. That's a lot of guns. Yeah. Now, bear arms. What does bear arms mean? And the fun thing is, in DC versus Heller, Justice Scalia had a blast dogging the other justices who were trying to pretend that bear arms was only for military use or only meant in the home. Well, you don't bear an arm in your home.
Right.
You don't. You bear an arm when you take it into action. That is, it is an action verb. Bearing arms is an action.
How can you secure a free state if you can't leave your house with your weapon?
Yeah, there's large swaths of that state that are outside my house that actually impact my life. And so right now, I have a concealed carry permit in Virginia. I can carry concealed or I can carry openly because Virginia is an open carry state. But if I go to D.C., where I actually need a gun, I can't carry one legally.
Right.
That's garbage.
Here's what's interesting here. The Hill says Supreme Court declines to take up 3 gun ownership cases. This was from the 19th. Mm-hmm. Now, when this came out, people were upset. They're like, oh, here it is. Supreme Court's not going to hear the cases. It could just be that they decided it would be pointless to take up these 3 when they can take up this one.
Yeah.
And this one they're taking up is fairly broad. They've
got a chance to decide what type of restrictions you can place on open or concealed carry as it applies to all 50 states. And what they need, and there's a very outstanding, we mentioned it earlier, the Firearms Policy Coalition put out a great amicus curiae brief, which is probably pretty mispronounced. But it said the idea is that the lower courts want guidance. They're acting on their own right now, and they're all going in different directions. Some of them are saying you can have no restrictions, some, and some anything you want. So they need guidance from the Supreme Court, which is why they took this case. They can give one set of guidance that says, and I think this is why they do, we'll find out, but they can say, okay, you can, you have to issue a permit if you're going to require a permit. It has to be shall issue, not may issue, which is the way they get around that. So shall issue, and you can't put undue burden on the person applying in order to make the process so onerous,
which they
do. Yeah, that's what I mean. At DC versus Heller was about. It's so hard to get a permit, and you couldn't get one unless you disassembled the gun. A gun that's disassembled is really hard to shoot somebody with.
Well, it's still almost impossible to get a gun in DC.
Yeah, and this is the chance though to ratchet that up another notch. So Scalia went a long way in DC versus Heller. I think this is going to be the next step. I think we've got a solid 5-4 majority. I hope Justice Thomas writes it, right? Because he would be a savage on this, and he's due to do something like that. He's been around long enough. He wants a legacy. This would be a great legacy. Scalia has Heller. He'd have that. And then write one that says, actually the words in the Constitution that are in English that are really easy to understand, they meant what they said. Holy crap.
Well, will this have any effect on like ATF regulations and NFA potentially?
That's interesting. I don't think it needs to. All right, because it's not about what type of guns. It's about can you take any gun?
Right.
A 22 pistol up through a 308 sniper rifle. You can either carry them or you can't. And what restrictions can you or can't you put on the open or concealed carry of any of those? And then do we get concealed carry reciprocity?
Right.
So that if I have a Virginia license and I have to go into DC, I can carry where I need to.
It is insane that you can be a law-abiding citizen driving from one place to another, and that state could still try and arrest you. Now, there's a federal law protecting you if you're traveling with weapons through the states. However, they say, well, if you get off the highway for gas or something, they can try and get you. Yeah, I know people who have suffered because of that.
Yeah, I don't recognize the right of any state to disarm me. So I will admit that I have violated laws about that because I just don't think they have the right to. I think it's incumbent on the government to make it legal to exercise my constitutional rights. And I think I would love to think this is the time it's going to happen.
So the Supreme Court could put out a blanket ruling that what if they put out a blanket ruling saying not outright there can be no laws regulating the right to keep and bear arms, therefore you don't need a permit at all.
No, I think they're going to, if they do a broad one, I think they will recognize certain classes of restrictions, felons, crazy people, whatever the things are. There's a fairly broad set of things, 12-year-olds, right? I don't want 12-year-olds open carry, but whatever it is.
Why not?
Well, because they're 12. And I don't believe children are adults. So I'm willing to make a distinction.
What was the age of adulthood when the founding fathers wrote the Second Amendment?
Yeah, I don't care. Our kids have gotten a lot dumber since then. So
what's the argument then in 50 years when they're like, you got to be 30 to own a gun because 26-year-olds are just out of school?
Yeah. Well, we changed that, right? You can change stuff like that. I think what you want to establish, though, is there has to be a rationale that is widely agreed on. Not just a very narrow niche thing that says, well, we're kind of scared of guns, so we're going to make it almost impossible for anybody to carry guns in our neighborhood.
This is another interesting thing, though. I mean, in many red states, they're passing constitutional carry. Yeah. I think, was it Iowa or was it Utah? Was it Utah?
Iowa.
Texas now is on the verge of passing constitutional carry. So what do I care if New York does? I don't live there. I suppose people of the state of New York might appreciate having this ruling for sure. And it's a good thing if we get clarification because the main point actually, I don't think is either pro or anti-2A. The main point is that how can we have different standards across the board for what the rules are? Some states say this, some states say that, some counties say something different. Mm-hmm. We need guidance from the Supreme Court that explains to us what the rules are so that there's uniformity, I suppose. And
the other thing is the Second Amendment is not a second-tier amendment. Right now, it's treated differently than the other amendments in that they have to provide cause and do other things. It's contingent on certain things that free speech is not. That the right to not self-incriminate is not. There are no contingencies there. There should be no contingencies other than the legitimate, things that we agree these people should not have guns. And let's make that as narrow as possible.
I wonder if we're consistently moving towards more and more rights under the Constitution. Interestingly, there was the period of war where we didn't have free speech. Mm-hmm. We had the Office of Censorship. Mm-hmm. And then free speech as we know it, I think, didn't take effect until like the 60s. Because there was a period where you couldn't yell fire in a crowded theater, and then that was overturned, I think, something like 40 or 50 years later. So then we actually said, okay, free speech means you can actually do these things.
I think I think it's earlier than that. I'm not sure when Brandenburg v. Ohio was, but it was somebody knows. Put it in the chat and then Lydia will tell us. But the bottom line is that is not contingent. And we move towards the idea that the common sense English words in the Constitution mean what they say.
1969.
Okay.
Yeah, so there was a ruling, I think it's the initial one was it Abrams, I think was it? Schenck. 1919 was when the justice was like, you can't say fire in a crowded theater. And then in 1969, they're like, actually, you can. Right. You just can't incite to, imminent lawlessness or whatever.
Yeah, and it has to be something that was going to happen. So let's have a reasonable standard like that. And that's understood because one of the things that Scalia did in DC versus Heller is he codified the individual right. He said, here's what this actually means. It should be in common use and it should be useful for potential service in the militia. All right, that's simple, and that can change over time. It was a musket, now it's an AR-15. Good, let's go with that.
I do love just I don't think conservatives should be all that worried, or actually, no, maybe they should be. There's pros and cons to having an argument with someone who has no idea what they're talking about. It's really hard for them to properly regulate firearms, and they don't know what they are.
Right.
So it's like, we're going to ban AR-15s. And you're like, all right, my AKs are good. It's like, you know what you're talking about? No. So there's a bunch of different kinds of guns. You don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
The other problem is that they're like, fully semi-automatic assault rifles must be banned. And you're like, I got no idea what that is.
Does it come with a chainsaw bayonet?
Yes. The problem then is you get cops who are like, I don't know, you're under arrest. I've talked to cops. All right. So I'm moving out here, and there's some areas because we're really close to the state border.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm like, I'm going to ask the different states, what their rules are. First thing the gun shop told me was, don't bother. They have no idea what they're talking about. And so sure enough, I'm like, all right, well, let me call one of these, departments in a nearby, across in a different state, not one that I live in, and ask them what their rules are just in case. And he's like, you need a permit. And I was like, so if I have like a long gun in my trunk and there's no ammo, you need a permit. And I was like, okay, so like even long guns, like in the trunk? Yes. And I'm like, so handguns, permit. And I'm like, how do you get a permit for a long gun? You get a permit. And I'm like, okay, thank you. Have a nice day. You don't get a permit. That's ridiculous. Like the cop didn't. So imagine the cop pulls you over. You got a permit for this, 410 break action, It's like, no.
My smoothbore brown Bess that I was bringing to the reenactment.
My flintlock. You need a permit for this. I don't even know how to get a permit for this. Right. It's a flintlock. You don't need an FFL for this. And they're like, you're under arrest. And it's going to happen. And that's the problem with cops in these blue areas. So going back to it, so I'm like, defund them, whatever. Because then I'll tell you this, personal responsibility. If you want to live there and these people are saying defund the police and you won't take responsibility for defending them, then I'm not going to defend you either. I'll tell you this. If you still want to live there and you won't take responsibility for protecting yourself, I'm not going to defend you either.
And those two things dovetail perfectly, which is why I carry. I'm relatively certain that there's not a cop following me everywhere I go. If there is, he's really good, right? And that's one sneaky guy. But if there isn't, I know that I can take care of myself. Now, I'm not usually the prey, but it doesn't matter. I carry so that I could intervene if someone else is being abused. If you don't have a gun, I'm 100% less likely to intervene in a bad situation than I am if I do, because I know I have the trump card, right? So I will help people, and that's a net good for society.
Maybe you shouldn't, though. If people don't take responsibility for themselves, you run the risk of facing liability for intervening. Thanks for checking out this clip from the Timcast IRL podcast. If you want to see the full show, come back to this channel, youtube.com/TimcastIRL, Monday through Friday at 8 p.m., where you can leave comments and super chat, and we actually will read your comments on the show. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and if you want exclusive members-only content, segments you can't get anywhere else, go to timcast.com, become a member, and we even have full bonus episodes. Thanks for hanging out, and we'll see you all next time.